Hello, and welcome to Stowe Talks, a podcast designed to support people going through a relationship breakdown and all the challenges this brings. I'm Matthew Taylor.
And I'm Lisa Gatchell, family lawyers at Stowe Family Law. And today we are delighted to welcome back to the podcast Dr Supriya McKenna. Dr Supriya McKenna is one of the best known names in the field of narcissism and is an Amazon best-selling author on the subject of how narcissists behave in divorce. She started out as a medical doctor and trained as a GP. Recognising then a huge need for education in UK family lawyers, in 2020, Supriya conceived the groundbreaking guide Narcissism and Family Law, a practitioner's guide, which she wrote parallel with UK solicitor Karen Walker. That book remains the only book for family lawyers on the subject of narcissism. Supriya has trained thousands of family law professionals in narcissistic personality disorder. She works directly with those who have fallen victim to narcissistic abuse and produces and hosts a top 5% podcast, Narcissists in Divorce, The Narcissist Trap.
So Supriya is a long-time friend of the pod, possibly best friend of the pod, given the number of times we've dragged her on here to talk about all things narcissism. So for anyone listening or watching who hasn't had the previous experience of Supriya's presence on here, just flag up that we've got some previous episodes. So the first one is divorcing or separating from a narcissist. The second one, rebuilding life after narcissistic abuse. We have a two-parter, parenting alongside the narcissist. And today we're going to be talking about are you in a relationship with a narcissist is the topic of today's podcast. And then next week we're doing yet another one. We're really, really getting bang for a buck from our time with Supriya here. And she'll be back to talk to us about how to prepare for leaving a narcissist. So lots of great content. And if anyone hasn't listened to those, it's maybe worth going back to some of those previous ones because it provides some background advice to what is a fascinating and very tricky topic. So hi Supriya, thanks for joining us again. Hi. So let's jump in. So are you in a relationship with a narcissist? Well, I guess the first question is, why is it important to know if you're in a relationship with a narcissist if you're considering leaving them anyway?
Yeah, that is such an important question because actually so many people use that word narcissist all the time. They just think that it just means someone a bit difficult or they're having a tough time with their ex and they just think, well, they're a narcissist. So it's really, really important to know whether you're actually in a relationship with a real narcissist, because just as real narcissists behave in set ways in their lives, they actually behave in set ways within the divorce process as well. So very, very predictable ways and awful ways, I'm going to say that, but predictable ways. So that the way that they behave in divorce is predictably awful. And that's kind of why. So narcissistic divorces are just much, much worse than normal divorces because you're going to be subjected to emotional abuse, you're going to be subjected to financial abuse, and you're going to be subjected to legal abuse where the legal system is actually used as a weapon against you. And so if you're in a divorce process with a narcissist, there's a financial and emotional cost to that, just because it's so difficult. And also, potentially your children are at risk of more harm than they would be in another type of breakup, because it could be that if you don't actually go through the process properly, the children can end up living with a narcissistic parent for the bulk of the time. The courts can get it wrong. So if you're going into court about the children, they can get it wrong. Also, you need the right lawyer, and we're going to talk about that when we do our next episode about how to prepare for leaving a narcissist. But it's really important. You can't just have a nice divorce lawyer who hasn't really dealt with narcissism before. You need a really experienced lawyer who has. And also, unfortunately, you've got to be aware that post-separation abuse is a feature of narcissistic abuse. So narcissists will try to emotionally and financially abuse you forever. And if they can, and they'll try to use the children and the legal system as weapons forever. So basically, your lawyers need to be able to predict these post-separation behaviours as well, because you need to have really, really tight court orders if you're going down the court route. And there can't be any loopholes, because if there are loopholes, a narcissist is going to find them and it's going to be awful. So that's all going to feed into that post-separation abuse. So it's so important.
Yeah. I mean, you said at the beginning that the narcissism word, it does get thrown around a little bit at the moment. So how does somebody know or work out if they are in a relationship with a real narcissist?
There's lots and lots to this. A lot of it is focused on the narcissist's behaviours That's kind of a big part of it. How do they behave? But what I want to do today is actually focus upon, so firstly, I want to talk about intimate relationships with narcissists, which have gone on for a few years. This is quite important because you as a person will only get to feel a certain way after a few years of being with a narcissist. And what I do, so my book, Narcissists and Divorce, From Lovelock to Leaving, I have a detailed questionnaire. It's a 90-point questionnaire which goes into every single thing to help you decide whether you're in a relationship with a narcissist. But what I want to do is really talk about how you feel today, because that's the first. So you need to know about their behaviors, but you also need to turn the focus back on you and consider how you are feeling and what your experience is, because there are pointers there, really key pointers, which will help you to decide whether you're in a relationship with a narcissist. And that's what I want to do today, talk about how you're feeling, your experience, rather than focusing on those behaviors that a narcissist will carry out.
Before we get into the sort of things of, looking at the particular ways that people are feeling, I think this is quite an interesting and really helpful way to address things. So I think one of the, and it happens in almost every divorce, it's not exclusive to narcissistic, ones involving narcissistic personalities, but I think it is particularly prevalent in those, is that clients will often fixate and spend all their time during the divorce process of talking about the behaviour of the other party. And rather than thinking about the effect on them, and rather than thinking about what they want, partly that's about a bit of sort of training in an almost Pavlovian way that you have to concentrate on the behavior of the narcissist to survive during a narcissistic relationship. But I think something about switching that around and taking the control and focus on actually what does that mean to me is a really important thing in the divorce process. So I think it's a really useful tool.
And that's exactly it. I mean, you've just said it there. That's that everything is about the narcissist, because they revolve around the narcissist. They don't consider their own needs. They consider the narcissist's needs and put them above their own. That's how things end up. So it is really important early on to try and kind of switch that around. Otherwise, people just talk about the narcissist and they just consider the narcissist. They just consider, well, how's the narcissist going to feel about this? And, everything is about them. And it's time to make that switch, which is really hard to do. So hopefully this is kind of the first step in that.
Yeah. So do you want to run us through some of the things that people might want to think about when they're reflecting on how they feel about their partner's behaviour?
Yeah. One of the first ones is, do you feel uncherished and uncared for by your partner? Every single person that's been in a relationship with a narcissist, towards the end of that relationship, realizes that actually that's how they come to feel. They feel uncherished and uncared for. And that's down to that lack of empathy. So lack of empathy is a key factor in narcissistic relationships. They haven't developed empathy. They haven't got to that developmental stage of being able to develop empathy. And that will make you feel uncherished and uncared for. And another one is, have you lost self-esteem during your relationship? Because you'll have been put down and ridiculed and criticized and gaslit, and that will have had an effect on how you feel about yourself. So at some point in your relationship, you probably walked in with decent self-esteem, but you will have lost a lot of self-esteem. So have you lost self-esteem during your relationship is another biggie. Do you feel as if your feelings don't matter or are invalid? And that's huge. So narcissists don't like it when you express your feelings. And quite often, actually, you're not allowed to express any negative feelings at all. And that's called toxic positivity. You've got to act happy around them to keep them happy. So that's toxic positivity. So do you feel as though you have to act happy around them to keep them happy? Do you feel you're not allowed to express any kind of unhappiness or dissatisfaction to them? And if you do that, do you feel guilty? Do they make you feel guilty if you actually express negative feelings? Do they turn it on you and say, oh, you're criticizing me because you're saying that I'm not making you happy? So that's another big one.
I think those are really, really key ones in sort of my experience with narcissistic cases. It's that walking on eggshells thing. It's that keeping up a front. It's interesting because obviously narcissists can't be empathetic, but can put a mask on. And there are lots of cases where, people feel uncherished and uncared for when it's not a narcissistic case. Generally, people do lose self-esteem when they come to us. People are rarely, skipping and jumping about how they feel about themselves. But I think those two, that kind of having to put a front on while the narcissist is putting a front of pretend empathy on, is something that seems quite common that gets my sort of spidey sense tingling about a narcissistic case. I mean, at least if you feel the same when you've had these sort of cases.
Yeah, definitely. It's definitely one of the things that really kind of stands out and makes you think, oh, hold on a second, need to dig into this a little bit more.
Another thing is, with narcissistic relationships, you either are all good or you're all bad to the narcissist. So people get the sense that they're either hero or zero, basically, to their partner, and there's little in between. And that's because they literally cannot see people as a blend of good or bad. They can't even see themselves as a blend of good or bad traits. So you're either all good and everything's fine, or you're terrible and you're being vilified. That doesn't happen in normal relationships, because it's a psychological phenomenon called whole object relations, which people have to develop. Toddlers don't have it. Toddler will kind of scream about not getting the ice cream before tea time, kind of thing. And mummy will therefore be all bad for not letting the toddler have the ice cream. Whereas over time, they'll come to realize, oh, hang on a minute, maybe I shouldn't. Maybe I'll wait till after tea. They're very much like toddlers in that regard. So do you go from hero to zero? Are you either all good or all bad? Another one is, do you feel that you have to be absolutely perfect for your partner? And again, this is down to that whole object relations. Narcissists only view people as perfect or utterly defective, nothing in between. And again, that's true of themselves as well. So that's another key one. Because, I mean, in normal relationships, people are able to sort of put up with your faults. They are able to do that. Even just tiny little faults, they're able to put up with them. Do you feel as if no matter how much you give of yourself, you can never be enough for your partner? That's a really key one as well. No matter what you do, no matter how many hoops you jump through to try to keep them happy, you can never be enough. And that's down to that concept of narcissistic supply. So we've talked about that in previous episodes. But narcissistic supply is basically, narcissists get it from attention, they get it from adoration, they get it from drama, they get it from conflict, but they need this constant supply of essentially external validation. And you just can't, one person just can't give them enough of it. So people come out feeling like no matter what they do, they just can't do enough or be enough.
How does that sit with, so something we talked about quite a bit before is the initial phase of a relationship and the love bombing phase. And when, the narcissist is acting such a way to make the abuse sufferer feel on cloud nine, and like they are able to presumably hit those standards. I'm interested in how that then, those impossible standards, which probably come into play a bit later, how does that transition work? Because it seems that there's probably a change. Am I right in saying there's probably a change in that over the course of a relationship?
Yeah, I mean, the thing is that that's a cycle. So it's love bombing and then it's devaluation. I call it nice narcissist, nasty narcissist. It's this kind of cycle, and this is an essential part of the cycle. They're going to be nice to you because they've got to be nice to you to rope you back in, and then they'll be nasty to you to make themselves feel better about themselves and to alter the power dynamic. So that's how it happens, basically. It's a cycle that goes round and round and round, but people don't recognize it as a cycle because the cycle lengths are variable, and the size of the love bombings and the size of the devaluations are the put downs and the ridicule and the criticisms, but they're also variable. So you don't see what's going on. You don't recognize that this is just a round and round type of cycle. And then over time, things just degenerate and they become more and more. There's more devaluations and that they get bigger, the cycles are shorter, and it just gets worse and worse and worse. And that you get that sense then that there you can never be enough. It just over time you realize that no matter what I do, I can't be enough. It's just more and more predominant as a feature.
Is there kind of a time period? I know you can't put it down to like days and months, but is this something that happens over the period of months? Is it years usually? To that switch, the change to happen?
It does depend on the narcissist. It really does. I mean, I've heard of people who they've gone from the love bombing phase to the devaluation really, really quickly. And some people have they've been in relationships for a few years and then they've got married to the narcissist, and that's when the devaluations have started. But actually, when they look back, those people who say, oh no, it was fine for whatever, a few years, when they look back, they go, actually, there were things where their heart would sink, but they didn't recognize them as criticisms or devaluations. They knew their heart would sink, but they just kind of thought that the narcissist was right, and they didn't see what it was that was happening to them. So it's hard to say when it happens. And it's actually more about, when did you first recognize that it was happening? And everybody has a different threshold for actually recognizing it because of their backgrounds. What are they used to? If they came from a narcissistic household, they were brought up by narcissists, they're going to not even see that that's happening at all. It's going to be much harder for them to recognize it. So I think it's more about that, because it's probably happening fairly quickly to everybody, but some people just don't see it for a long, long time.
Okay, so we've got these cycles, and we've got this the love bombing thing, and then you build these impossible standards. What are some other ways that people might act and make you feel in terms of, you know, managing the day-to-day kind of relationship?
So lots of people come out feeling like they are not seen as a whole person. So narcissists don't see people as three-dimensional people at all. You're not three-dimensional. You shouldn't have your own wants or needs. They view people as objects. So people come out of these relationships feeling completely unseen and completely unheard. And they get a sense that the narcissist doesn't actually know who they are, like at their core. They just don't know who they are. So they feel almost invisible at the end of these relationships, because of that idea that, you know, narcissists just can't see you as an actual 3D person, but just as an object. And then another thing is that they often feel like they're just a kind of supporting actor in the narcissist show, or just a prop or an accessory in their life. So they'll pitch up and look good going out with the narcissist work colleagues, and that's their role. I mean, they end up having to just kind of fall into this role of being a sort of supporting actor or a kind of accessory.
That's a great analogy, I think, that a supporting actor thing. I think something that I've liked as another analogy that's probably similar is the front cover of your Narcissist Trap book, where you have the narcissist effectively the sun and the planets orbiting in the solar system. And it's that idea that they are central to, you know, they can't understand the concept that the universe doesn't revolve around them. So everyone's a supporting actor, everyone feeds into that, everyone is, you know, it's almost like the Truman Show, where everyone is there designed to kind of support this one character.
Yeah, that's exactly it, because they just can't see it as anything else. They are the sun in their own solar system, and everybody else is revolving around them. And the thing is that people buy into that themselves, and they do actually start to revolve around them. They do make them the sun in their solar system. It's remarkable, but that's how it happens.
The feelings, etc., that we've been discussing, I would imagine that the victim can internalize a lot of those, and they can show themselves in other ways. So quite physical symptoms or mental health concerns. Is that quite positive? Can you go into that a little bit?
Yeah, that happens all the time. So people suffer from anxiety, depression, low moods, mood swings, irritability. They're on a short fuse. Those kind of mental health issues are a huge, huge part. And of course, they think it's them. They think it's their fault. They think it's, well, that's who I am. I'm just a really anxious person, or I'm just a depressive, or I'm just really irritable and unreasonable. That happens to many, many people. They take that on and take the blame for it. But equally, that can translate to physical symptoms. Chest pains, very common. Headaches, swallowing problems. Swallowing problems is surprisingly common. I mean, it's a real sign. People have had all these investigations for it, and there's nothing wrong, but they really feel like there are times when they find it really difficult to just eat, or a big red flag. Tiredness, joint pain, back aches, any kind of aches and pain. Backache is quite a common one, because you really can hold the stress in your back muscles, and that can be very, very painful. But then serious illnesses, and this is really terrible, because if you've been in a fairly long-term relationship with a narcissist, you are at risk of developing serious physical illnesses. It's the trauma, basically. And it's known that trauma can cause changes to your physiology, which does lead to serious illnesses like cancer, like autoimmune conditions, like kind of rheumatoid arthritis, lupus, chronic fatigue, fibromyalgia, but also MS. Really, really serious issues can occur. And I've had a number of patients, a really surprising number of patients, clients. I'm still in doctor mode. Clients who've had breast cancer, ovarian cancer, lymphoma, liver type illnesses that aren't related to alcohol, all sorts of chronic illnesses. Surprising number. So that's quite scary.
It's really terrifying. and obviously, I mean, seems extreme, but fairly, sadly commonplace in your line of work. So, but really, kind of stark reminder. Something that I was sort of thinking about and I've often had this thought, is when you describe the behaviour of narcissists. And I don't know if when you were talking about tiredness and things inspired me on this, but there's something about the behaviour of a narcissist that reminds me of looking after a child. That centre of the universe thing, that inability to understand anyone else, that's how toddlers are, because they can't, and it's not their fault, it's because their brains can't comprehend other people. But it seems to me that is something that still applies to narcissists, and it's a lot harder to deal with the narcissist, and that's probably why it makes you ill, because they should know better, but they don't, and they can't. I mean, is that sort of a fair summation?
Yeah. People always say, "Oh, if they had 2 children, they go, yeah, I have 3 children." I mean, that's just so common. I have 3 children, because they are emotionally immature, and they do chuck their kind of toys out of the pram, and they stamp their feet, and they just haven't reached certain developmental stages. And sometimes, your 8-year-old or 9-year-old will be more. It will feel as if they're more emotionally mature than the narcissist. And that's really, it's a big feature. So yeah, and that's one of the questions in the questionnaire that I have in the book. Do you feel as if you're looking after a needy child with regards to your partner?
And what about things like gaslighting? That's something we've talked about quite a bit. That's obviously kind of me putting the focus on the behaviour of the narcissist. But how can someone identify that from the way that they feel?
Yeah. So the big question there is: do you feel as though you can't trust your perceptions or your feelings or your memory of events? So do you find yourself trusting their judgment of situations over your own instead? And that's a real sign of gaslighting, because basically they're making you question those perceptions. They're making you question your own feelings. And we talked about feelings earlier, but when they say to you, no, you shouldn't be feeling that. You should be feeling this because of blah, 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 blah. That didn't happen. This is what happened. She didn't say this. She said that. Or even with the perceptions, the old classic, the one that I was really shocked by was, I had a client he'd make a cup of tea, the narcissist, in front of her, and then he'd say, no, it's not tea, it's coffee, 5 minutes later, just really throwing her off, so that her perceptions and her memory was just completely shot. So yeah, how do you feel about? Do you let them make the big decisions because you feel like you can't really do that? Does it feel like they're your voice of reason? Do you let them? Have you handed everything over to them in terms of the power? Decision making is a big one there as well.
And I guess with that, it's a case of, with that sort of gaslighting, even when they are quite obviously wrong, they probably never apologize. They probably never accept. So is that, if you're with somebody, and we all do things wrong, don't we? We all get things, we probably all need to be apologizing every now and again for something. So if you're with somebody, you think, actually, I don't think they've ever said sorry. Would that be a big red flag?
It's a huge red flag. They've never said sorry and meant it. So they might have said sorry, perhaps in a love bombing phase, and kind of thrown themselves at your feet. But have they ever said sorry and meant it? That's the question. And you realise in retrospect that they just haven't. They can't. Because if they say sorry, then what they're doing is they're admitting culpability, and then they will feel shame. And a narcissist can't feel shame. They mustn't feel shame, because that's what lies actually at the kind of core of them. So they don't want to feel shame, because if they feel shame, it will feel like an existential crisis for them. Their narcissism is actually a shield that they put up to protect them from feeling shame. So they're not going to apologize. They're not going to accept the blame, because that would be the opposite of what their narcissism is for. They can't feel shame. They mustn't feel shame. That's the thing that they're trying to avoid over everything. So apologizing and meaning it just is never going to happen.
So what about if someone is feeling a bit, unsettled, because maybe they feel that, have they glimpsed behind the shield or the mask? Is that something where someone can go, oh, okay, you're a different person to what you're presenting to me, or to what I thought? Is that one of the sort of telltale triggers?
Yeah, so they call that the dropping of the mask. And if a narcissist isn't getting enough narcissistic supply, So, for example, if you're threatening to leave or whatever, if things don't go their way and you're not complying anymore, because partners of narcissists are very, very compliant usually for a long, long time in the relationship. But if you stop doing that, the mask will sometimes drop. And that's quite terrifying, because you sort of see this creature really that's kind of behind the mask, who's just not the person that you've been kind of sleeping soundly next to for however many years. And people always recognize that. And it's kind of a memory that will stay kind of etched on their brains forever. People say, "Oh, have you ever seen the black eyes of the narcissist?" If you actually Google that, black eyes of a narcissist, it's all over the internet. What happens actually during the dropping of the mask is that because of all the adrenaline that's going around their system, their pupils dilate. So it's not some kind of, oh my God, there's an evil thing behind it here. It's just pupil dilatation because of all the adrenaline. But that's part of it does look like massive kind of black eyes. And I mean, they can snarl and hiss, and they contort their faces in completely different ways to how they actually are. And you just get a sense, oh my God, this is the real person. This is the real person. Finally, you think, oh my God, this is actually who I've been married to for all these years. So that's a big one, the mask drop.
That must be really frightening though, as well, isn't it? When you've, suddenly, if they're snarling and their face is completely changed, almost oh my goodness, I must really toe the line now because, I've seen this glimpse of this other side, and I perhaps don't want to see where that could lead.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I mean, so some people are like, okay, that's it. I've got to leave. Because the thing is, it might last for just a few moments. It can be flashes, but it might be enough. Those few moments might be enough for someone to go, that's it. That's the real, because you do get that sense that's the real person. So that can be enough for some people to say, that's it, I'm out. But for others, you're right, it can just be so terrifying. And they're like, if I don't do what I'm supposed to do, this is what's going to show through. And I don't want to see this. So they stay, and they're even more compliant for a time anyway.
Yeah. So if somebody's listening to this, or they've been, considering this for a while, and I think actually, the list of things that we've just been through there that you've explained, I kind of hit a lot of those. So perhaps there's a high probability that actually I am in a relationship with a narcissist and they're considering leaving. Should they leave as soon as they are aware? Is there any other considerations that should be taken into account?
Oh, there's loads of considerations, because you've got to think about your children. Even if the narcissist hasn't spent any time with the children at all, hasn't gone to sporting things, hasn't gone to parents' evening, hasn't just taken no interest in them whatsoever, never picked them up, suddenly they're going to want 50-50. You're going to get divorced. And you really do need to think about how you're going to manage that, because it's a big surprise to a lot of people, and it might be completely wildly inappropriate. So how old are the kids? If the kids are 5, can't wait it out. But at kind of 13, 14, they're approaching 13 or 14, their views are obviously taken into account by the courts. And I mean, you can sort of tell us more about this, but their views are more important. And so if your child is 11 and a half, maybe, or 12, it might be worth just waiting a year and, setting up how you're going to leave, because there's lots to do before you leave, as we'll discuss in the next episode.
Yeah, I think on that, just to drop in the legal stuff, that's absolutely the case. So under Section on the Children Act, the court's got to take into account a number of things in the welfare checklist. And one of those things is the wishes and feelings of the child, considered in light of their age and emotional maturity. So the older they are, the more streetwise. And obviously there are some very emotionally secure and advanced 11-year-olds, 9-year-olds, and some 11-year-olds who really are still kind of quite babyish. So there's not a hard and fast line, but the older they are, the more likely the court is to keep things in mind. But also, we've talked before a bit about process with narcissists, and court is expensive, and lots of grandstanding, and don't necessarily always have either the knowledge of the narcissists or the time to really dedicate to delving into the narcissism. So we've talked about alternative processes, and when you have older kids, then something that I'm interested in, Supriya, on your views on this, is whether child-inclusive mediation can be an appropriate method. And so that's where the mediator will speak to a child and take their views, but will hold confidences. So the mediator won't then go and say, yeah, little Johnny says he doesn't like your dad. It's going to be a lot more nuance than that. And the mediator can take the views of the children into then the negotiations about happens. Is that a system that can work quite well with older kids in terms of sorting out patterns, Supriya, or is that something you'd advise to steer away from?
Well, this is difficult because my understanding of child inclusive mediation, because I was chatting to someone who does child inclusive mediation, is that they do actually have to tell the parents what the child has said, what the child wants. So the child might say, oh, I want to live with mum, or I want to live with dad, or whatever. And they do have to say that. They do. I don't think they can keep confidences in child inclusive mediation. I think the only type of mediation where they can actually keep confidences is hybrid mediation. So my understanding, and if I'm wrong, please do say, but my understanding is that they can't keep confidences, and they do have to tell the parent. They can do it in a kind of nice way, but they do have to tell them. And so that can be if that is the case, that's the real problem, or it can be a real problem, because of course it can cause the narcissistic parent to be quite ragey against the child.
Perhaps keeping confidences wasn't the right phrase. It's more about the way in which the message is delivered then, in terms of child inclusive mediators are incredibly good at conveying messages in a sensitive way. So it's about getting that viewpoint across in a way, because one of the problems that often comes up in court proceedings is we may have a client who says, look, my kid doesn't want to spend time with her dad, but is too scared to say that. And I think this is a method where it might be a bit easier to convey that messaging.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's down to the individual case, but basically, yes, it could be useful. It depends again it depends on the narcissist. If it can invoke shame in the narcissist, which can be so, is your narcissist really prone to shame when it comes to the children? If so, that might be quite useful. Basically, if they're the devaluing, really nasty sort, are they going to turn this on the children and say, how dare you, and you said this, and actually just make things even more difficult for the children? And what age do you think they can do child? I can't remember the age that they do child inclusive mediation from.
I think it's 10, roughly.
Yeah. I think it's around that. But again, it will depend on the child. There are some 10-year-olds who it's just not appropriate for, and some who it will. But it's really, I think you tell me if you take a different view, Lisa. Around the time that kids are preparing to go to secondary school, I think that's kind of when you think, okay, their views are going to have some weight here, and then they get into secondary school and it kind of increases from that point.
Yeah, I think definitely. And I think also the courts are very aware that, when you start dealing with preteens and teenagers, if need be, they will vote with their feet. And it is much harder to force, if you like, a 13-year-old into a car and into contact than it is when you're dealing with a 5-year-old. And, I've unfortunately had cases where children have escaped out of windows and have run off. And, that effectively puts the children at significant risk. So the courts are, to a certain degree, aware that can happen as the children get older. So it's finding that balance.
Unfortunately, narcissists won't. They just think, well, the child is the extension of me, so I don't care how old they are, they will be coming to visit me. And they'll threaten that I'm going to take your mother to court if you don't come and visit me this weekend. I mean, there are text messages like that that fly around. I mean, I've seen them. And I've got a case at the moment where it's a 15-year-old and a 16-year-old. And the narcissist is still trying to take the mother to court. In fact, they are going to court about, he's saying that she's alienating them. She's not. That's their own decision. And the court is hearing this. I mean, that's what I find absolutely remarkable. This has gone to a final hearing.
It's difficulty. There's unless there's some incredibly stunning evidence, and it's very difficult for the court to make definitive early determinations in cases. It can give indications, but generally, unless a parent will kind of, okay, I give up, I understand, this is what my kids feel, which a narcissist is incapable of, these things are going to go to a final hearing, because that's the point at which the court can make a determination. And I guess that kind of leads into another thing, because narcissists don't give up on things, so like a dog with a bone, because they can't admit defeat. These cases can be longer and more expensive, so there's probably something just purely practical, and you talked about finding the right lawyer and doing your homework first, in making sure you've got the money to kind of help you out with the legal costs of dealing with things, and making sure you're putting those costs to the right things at the right time, rather than throwing everything at some early correspondence and getting stuck into enormous costs early before you can really, it's something that you're never really going to achieve anything. You need to be a bit clever about that, and building up your war fund can be, a reason to delay, I guess.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, that's huge. It's eye-wateringly expensive trying to divorce a narcissist. And as you say, their lawyer is going to throw a load of rubbish at your lawyer, and your lawyer is going to respond. And you will, at the beginning, you'll think, oh my God, we've got to respond to everything. I'm being accused of all sorts of things. I'm going to have to explain myself and justify and argue and defend and all of that. And actually, through legal correspondence, which is going to cost you a huge amount of money, and you will have got nowhere, absolutely nowhere. It won't make a difference. This is just another tactic to financially abuse you. So actually, you need to be really careful about where you're spending your money and what your lawyer is responding to. And of course, the lawyer's earning from this. So it's kind of, depending on the lawyer, they might be up for just happily writing these letters because this is reaching their targets.
Yeah, it's really difficult sometimes as well, though, to manage clients in this respect, because if you've received a 4-page, attack of your personality, we get it and we'll say that actually, of all of this one line is the only bit that we need to respond to. But then often get, well, I don't feel like you're fighting my corner. Well, you can't win sometimes in respect of it. And that's why I think actually it's really important for people that are going through this to be fully appraised, if you like, of the situation that they're in, and to get support from yourself or a divorce coach or somebody that can work alongside them to so that they're in the right place to work with us. Because actually, if they just see those letters come in and they want to respond to them as well, ultimately we take clients' instructions and we can argue until we're blue in the face. But if the client really wants to respond to that letter, we kind of find ourselves in a bit of a catch-22.
Yeah, and it fuels the fire, and you have to give that advice. And I find myself giving that advice all the time, and I can hear when it's going across badly, and I will often invoke a bit of Michelle Obama. They go low, we go high, and you just ignore it and try and get over it. But if someone's sort of psyched themselves up to try and leave and suddenly feels, I've had years and years of this and now I need to fight back, it's counterintuitive to then say, we're just not going to respond to any of that stuff and we're going to focus on what's actually important. So that can be, and having those conversations with clients takes time and therefore costs money in and of itself. So, you can find yourself as in slight defense of a lawyer who, when we spend our time kind of trying to help clients and we're not doing things to run up costs, and of course there's a cost to it because it's a business. It can be a really difficult message to get across, and to have a client feel like Lisa says that you've still got their back and you're fighting their corner.
And of course there'll be people in the background, their parents or their friends go, you can't let him get away with this, you've got to fight. And they don't realise that it's going to cost, people who spent 30, 40, 50, 60, I had someone who spent £85,000. They ain't got anywhere. They haven't got anywhere at all. They hadn't got to any hearings. They just got nowhere because this was all in correspondence. This has all gone on correspondence.
And no one's ever going to see these letters. They're not going to get in a bundle before a judge at final hearing. We don't put them in.
Now, that is so important. I'm really, really glad you've said this, because I've worked with lawyers. I've worked on cases where people have said, oh, no, we're writing for the judge. Solicitors have said, we're writing for the judge. And they're not writing for the judge, really. They're just writing to the lawyer and actually the narcissist. Because as you say, these letters don't go in the bundle anymore. And are they not? They're not allowed to go in the board. So what are the rules on that?
This is absolute geek stuff, but I love this. Practice Direction 27A of the Family Procedure Rules prohibits you from including correspondence in a bundle unless you are specifically going to refer to it at the hearing. So if you are going to cross-examine someone on a letter, then you can include it. Otherwise, it doesn't go in. Very rarely does any pre-action correspondence, say for your initial couple of letters, if you said, hey, I want to use non-court dispute resolution, which we've talked about on the pod before, very rarely will that go in. You've got a limit of 350 pages for a bundle. By the time you've included statements, position statements, chronologies, applications, orders, you don't have space. And the court will say, well, so what if you wrote about something 18 months ago? We are where we are now, and we've got a Kafka's report, and this is what we're going to do. So very rarely, and like minuscule amounts, maybe a handful of things, something you might attach to a statement. But if you are dealing with, reams and reams of pre-action correspondence, no one's ever going to see the bulk of it.
I think that's so important, because I do think that I know that some lawyers go, oh no, we've got to do it. We've got to be seen to have. It seems to be the older lawyers. So I don't know if this is a new practice direction or relatively new, but
not new. But when I was a trainee, I used to do final hearing bundles that would go for lever arches and lever arches and lever arches, and then you would traipse someone down to court, and it would have every letter from the file in, and then no one would refer to them in hearing.
Yeah. So that's important for people to know. So those letters where you're defending yourself, you don't need to even go there. Let them spout their bile at you and let them kind of accuse you of being worst human on the planet and whatever. But actually, they're paying for that. Let them do so. Don't give them the narcissistic supply of responding. Don't show them that it's upset you. And that's kind of a really important part in the battle plan. And it makes no difference. It's not going to get in front of a judge. You need to know that. I think that's really, really important. So I'm really pleased that we've talked about that, because that's a biggie. That's really important for people to know.
And that's part of the strategy, isn't it? I mean, Lisa, have you got any other tips from sort of your practice about things that you maybe ways in which you approach narcissistic cases differently from a non-narcissistic case in a sort of strategic way, or timing or approach?
So I definitely talk about Supriya. And one of the first things that we'll chat about is the grey rock technique and how that works and how we need to consider that. I think there will be less pre-action.
So what you mean by pre-action is?
So it will be a case of, we are going to suggest X, Y, and Z. And if they don't agree, we're not going to get into reams of correspondence on this. We're just going to issue. So usually pre-action is trying to agree it. So we'll try and agree it. So we'll suggest X, Y, and Z, or we'll suggest a way forward. But ultimately, if it's very clear that there's barriers being put in the way, we'll suggest arbitration, we'll suggest all the non-court dispute resolution. But I think we have to be prepared to issue much sooner.
So when you say issue, you mean apply to the court?
Apply to the court, potentially, if we're not getting anywhere. I think the way that I deal with correspondence is very different. As I said, I will very much say, look, we have to provide copies of the letters to clients, but I'll say, right, this is the letter. You're not going to like the contents of it. This is the only bit that we really need to respond to. And I suggest that we focus on this part, so that I kind of narrow it down for them to the paragraph, if you like, that they need to be looking at. But yeah, I think it's very much about trying to get that strategy very clear. And also, actually, when we get to, for example, if we're talking about finances and we're getting to a stage where there's offers on the table, very much weighing up the cost, and not just a financial cost of proceeding, but the emotional cost to them of proceeding. Absolutely. Saying, actually, if you take this to a final hearing, I think you might get X amount more. I think there is a good case for that, but it's going to take another 6 months. It's going to cost you another £50,000, and you're going to have to deal with the other person for that period of time. And so it's actually weighing up, okay, what's on the table may not be the absolute best, but it's enough. It's enough to sort of be able to start your new life. And it means that you can stop this now, and really getting them to weigh that up in a way that perhaps I wouldn't necessarily, if to such an extent, if I didn't have that type of personality type involved in the proceedings.
Yeah, I think that's so important. I mean, I always tell people, you're not going for the best financial outcome here, and you don't want your lawyer to necessarily be going for the best financial outcome, because the fight isn't worth having. And the trauma, I mean, even the president of the family division is kind of, he knows that family court is traumatic. I mean, that's a thing that's openly recognised. It's generally considered to be traumatising. For someone who's divorcing a narcissist, it's unbelievably traumatizing. They dread opening their mail. Is this going to be something from the court? Even years later. So that's how kind of traumatic it is. So the shorter you can keep it, if you have to be in court, really, the better. So yeah, accepting a financial outcome that is okay, that you can manage on, is just to get out, is definitely worth it. But can I ask about open offers on this? Because obviously, I think a lot of people, there's this whole without prejudice thing. I wonder if you can explain this to people, because it's without prejudice versus open offers. And how my understanding now is, if you make an open offer, you might have with a narcissist, you might have a better chance of actually closing the deal earlier, rather than going back and forth without prejudice offers.
So open offers are your position that the judge at any final hearing would know. So that is where you're saying to a judge, to the court, to the other side, here's what I want. Without prejudice is an offer where you make concessions in an attempt to try and settle, but the judge isn't aware of that until really at any stage in family proceedings, say for a few very specific examples. So I have a bit of a soapbox thing about the use of open offers and without prejudice offers, because I've got a soapbox thing about everything, apparently, in that I only really make open offers because there's a couple of reasons for that. One, most people don't make significant concessions enough for it to be a without prejudice offer, and therefore you may as well just pitch your case at the right level. But secondly, the costs rules are in financial proceedings. This is financial proceedings only. You don't have without prejudice in children proceedings. The court will only consider open offers from a cost perspective. And if you make a good, well-pitched open offer and the other party is ludicrous on their position and they're not negotiating reasonably when the financial landscape is clear, which is a quote from a case called OG and AG, which is really helpful on costs, then the court can make cost orders. So they're protective as well. And if you can engineer and you can be realistic and rational about your case, and particularly if you've got a client who will accept a bit less because they want to get a narcissist out of their life, then you can make a really well-judged, really aggressive, not too high, not asking for the moon on a stick open offer. You put the other party under threat of costs. So I think they are far better, because a without prejudice offer, if a narcissist isn't ever going to settle, is going to have no weight, because the judge is never going to see that and it can't be weighed from a cost perspective. So yeah, I'm a big open offer only fan.
And I think there's a worry that sometimes with open offers you can't change your position. Yeah. But I mean, there's nothing to stop you. I've got a case that's unfortunately going to final hearing at the moment. We had the FDR back in January, and the court directions actually provide that you have to give an open offer within 14 days of the FDR. So that was done, and it was done on quite a commercial basis. If we settle now, I'm not going to have to pay out for this final hearing, and therefore I will concede more. Obviously, going into the final hearing now, all the prep work's been done, the costs have been incurred, and therefore the open offer has changed. So that, I think sometimes people are really reluctant to do open offers because they think, oh no, the judge is going to see this and then I can't ever go back from it.
I have an open offer post a private FDR, which didn't settle, which is heading to a court final hearing where, and this was counsel's idea, not mine, so I'm not claiming credit for it, but I thought it was great, where the offer includes a lump sum, and that lump sum will reduce on a pound-for-pound basis on the basis of legal costs expended thereafter. So you are factoring in, if you accept it now, you're going to get this money. If you spend more money on legals, it's reducing the pot, so it reduces. So I think they're far better. And in narcissist cases, then being realistic, being open, not trying to say, well, here's the offer that if everything goes right and have the wind behind us and we get the best judge in the whole world and stuff that happens like absolute outliers, you might get this order. Well, it's rarely going to happen. So you're actually better pegging it more realistically in the hope that either it inspires settlement and stops the trauma of a final hearing and the risk of a bad outcome, or if you get there, it gives you that cost protection, because costs are big. And if you can get costs, then it's something that can really make a huge difference, I think.
So what you mean by cost just is your legal costs will be ordered that your legal costs have been for that final hearing, for example, are paid for by the narcissist.
Yeah. A proportion of the losing party on the basis of having made an offer that's not close to your offer, and if you make an offer that the judge says that offer was right, broadly right, then the losing party can pay a proportion of your costs. And I've had a couple of final hearings where that's been really successful, and the costs can be huge and like six figures on both sides, especially if you're dealing with a big money case. And you can end up with six-figure cost awards. It's enormous sums of money at play by being realistic and being open. And I think in narcissistic cases where you want to have less of the, maybe there'll be a bit of litigation pressure. It's a destruction tactic often from the narcissist to get into to litigation to annihilate the non-narcissist. So you need to put them under threat that if they are adopting an annihilation position, well, it's going to sting them in the pocket potentially.
So what about making an open offer early on, officially making an open offer relatively early in the process? So you've had financial disclosure, maybe you've had an FDA, and you're between FDA and FDR. Can the solicitors make open offers?
I do it all the time.
At that point?
Big fan.
Yeah, I'm a big fan, to be honest, and I've actually mentioned them in my in the next book because I think it's something that's really underused as far as I can see. But maybe I'm wrong.
Most cases, unless you're dealing with significant non-disclosure or where there's complex assets that you don't have full valuations for, most cases you can make an open offer between FDA, so your first hearing, and the FDR if you're in court proceedings, or not long after disclosure in the questionnaire if you're not in court proceedings. And I think it's generally the better thing to do. And I think that's way cases are moving, I think, Lisa, you probably agree with that, is that it's more common rather than just every offer. It was the case, I think, that every offer would automatically be without prejudice offer. Even if you are, you could get a without prejudice offer from someone which is, I want 100% of the assets. Well, you think, well, what's without prejudice about that? You're not conceding anything. You're asking for something you're never going to get anyway. So I think it's changing. And
we often double them up as well. So you'll send a without prejudice and an open. So open that's slightly higher, and then you'll make more concessions in a without prejudice, again, just to put some pressure.
Interest.
So I think before we sign off, we'll do our usual kind of bit of extra help or bit of positivity. So, it's maybe the best way to kind of sum stuff up, Supriya, is give people pointers, because it's such a huge topic, is give some people pointers of where they can go next. So what if people are looking for further clarity and want to explore further whether they think they're in a relationship with a narcissist, where can they head to after this?
I mean, there's lots and lots of resources on YouTube. There's lots of people talking about narcissism. It's certainly worth kind of looking up some of those people. But what I've done in my book is basically, so in Narcissists in Divorce, From Love Locked to Leaving, is I put that 90-point questionnaire in. I mean, I describe narcissistic behaviours in great detail and what they're going to do in divorce. So why it's so important to understand that if they are a narcissist. But I've got a 90-point questionnaire, and we've sort of run through some of the questions, just a very, very few of them, 3 30-point questionnaires. Basically, it's made up of 3 parts, but we went through some of the ones that are in the first section, which is the one focusing on you. But I would kind of definitely recommend that, because if you do that, you can score it, and the score will tell you whether they are a narcissist or whether they're likely to be a narcissist. And actually, if they get a really high score, how severe they are as well, and that's going to inform how bad the divorce is potentially going to be, and what you have to consider. So I think that's what I would recommend. I've got a few resources on my website, drsupriya.com as well. I've got a couple of online courses. One's called Is My Partner a Narcissist? Knowing for Sure. Another one is just about the behaviours, and that's called Demystifying the Narcissist. So that's another online course. But as I say, lots of people talking about narcissism on YouTube. The problem with that is that nobody's, there's no controls over that. So people can just sort of say whatever they want, and it's not necessarily true. So you have to be a little bit cautious. But there are some big names like Dr. Ramani, definitely worth listening to. You'll get a lot of clarity from listening to people like her on YouTube. She's got billions of videos. So that could be worth doing. I think it's also important to try and get yourself strong as well before if you think they are, get yourself strong. If you can, if you need psychotherapy, get the right kind of psychotherapist, but you might want to consider that. You might want to talk to a domestic abuse charity if you realise that there have been really big issues that perhaps you hadn't. Very often people don't realise, oh my God, this is domestic abuse. I've been controlled. I've got a case at the moment where the lady, she was not allowed out of the house. She was, what she wore for 40 years was controlled. He would stalk her by various methods. He would record her, and there'd be cameras. I mean, and she really just, because it was such a long relationship. And now that she's had help from a domestic abuse charity, she's really got clarity on, oh my God, that was proper coercive control. So I think that's important as well, to kind of, there are lots of resources like that available for people.
Brilliant. Well, thank you so much for joining us, because as always, it was a really interesting discussion. So that's it for this episode of Stowe Talks. Thanks for listening. If you are at any immediate risk of domestic abuse, please call the police or the National Domestic Abuse Helpline on 0808 2000 247. You can find out more about all the work that Supriya does at www.thelifedoctor.org. Her latest book, Narcissists in Divorce, From Love Locked to Leaving, is available from Amazon as an audiobook, on Kindle, or as a paperback. The second book in the Narcissists in Divorce series, From Leaving to Liberty, will be out in the late summer. The Narcissist Trap, The Mind-Bending Pull of the Great Pretenders, is also available to purchase on Amazon. Her podcast, Narcissists in Divorce, is one of the world's top 5% most downloaded podcasts. She has a range of online courses on narcissism at drsupriya.com, and blog posts and more information about the work she does can be found at thelifedoctor.org. She also regularly posts insights on LinkedIn, Twitter and Instagram. If you would like more information on our podcast, head over to stowtalks.co.uk, and please rate, like, share and review this podcast where you can.